The Good Place fue una de las tantas comedias geniales con el sello de Mike Schur que nos regaló, por ejemplo, Brooklyn Nine-Nine o Parks and Recreation. Tuvo hasta un profesor de filosofía en el set que los asistía durante los distintos capítulos de la producción y hasta tomó inspiraciones de desde lo narrativo, pero no así desde lo audiovisual. De hecho, hablé con su director de fotografía, David Miller, que me contó algunos detalles referidos a cómo fue llevar adelante esta producción. De hecho, me contó que la pensó como una novela gráfica y así fue como la fotografió. Y ya que hablábamos del arte, un detalle que me reveló que no estoy seguro que conocían respecto a cómo eran los sets, particularmente cuando estaban en el Good Place.
We now return to Mira Akien and Contre with our latest interview.
Just reading the material and understanding, to me, it was a graphic novel, and that's how I approached it, completely in my head. 20 years ago I would have said comic book, but now I will say graphic novel. And so that was, and I talked to Mike about that, what his thoughts were, and he agreed.
You, Eleanor Shellstrop, are dead.
Cool.
It was an interesting combination because Mike Schur, the creator, wanted something. He wanted to be able to shoot multiple cameras, but he didn't want it to look like a sitcom, and it's not. He wanted it to have more of a feature quality, but still have the ability to shoot multiple cameras for the comedy, because the comedy, works so much better when it's all happening at one time. When everyone is riffing off each other, you get there's an energy. And if someone makes an ad lib that works and then someone reacts to it, you have it all existing in real time, as opposed to trying to recreate it later on. And I wanted to make it as cinematic as possible. So there were a lot more cranes, a lot more steady cam, a lot more camera movement, but then still sticking with, listen, it's hard to beat, the comedy two shot. There are some tropes that you have to stick to, but then there are other things that, you could change. And I was allowed to do that on the show. And also, since the show took place, basically on stage, but then we rebuilt part of the back lot to be the village, that allowed me a tremendous amount of control. And that, certainly made it easier. And then you had a great cast. You had super talented people who could actually do the work. And also the show was fun. It wasn't a chore. And, and I think that comes through when you watch it. There's a happiness to it.
Janet has learned and grown. She's essentially living a life. We can't kill her.
Not with that attitude, we can't.
Everywhere it says that Lost was an inspiration for the narrative of the show.
Yeah.
Was it for the looks of the show as well?
I think it was more, I think it was more, just creatively, how they had approached it, because Drew Goddard was one of the producers and producing director, and he had done Lost. And so I think Drew had a tremendous influence on Mike as to kind of where the show was going to go, in the writing wise and things like that. And then also visually, Drew had really great ideas. And Drew is now doing the reboot of The Matrix. So I think he really had an influence in the writing of it, stylistically, and how it wanted to go, and I think, talking to him, and then he saw what I was doing, and then it kind of, everybody just started feeding off of each other. But I think absolutely Drew had a lot to do with how, how the show, in the direction that it went.
I can't risk going to the bad place.
Okay, well, maybe it's not all that bad. We'll ask Janet. Hey, Janet?
Hi there. How can I help you?
It's called The Good Place, but throughout the TV show, you understand that this is the bad place.
Right.
So did anything change in the way that you were like putting the show, like maybe teasing that they weren't in a good place? Like,
no. In fact, I think that was part of Mike's real thing, was like, if you notice, if you go back and look at it, there's no red in any of the sets or anything like that, or very rarely in the wardrobe. And I think that was absolutely set down by him right from the start, to basically go as far away from the idea, that you were in hell, in any way, shape, or form. And then later on, when we go, like, a perfect example is, I think it's like, I don't know if it's season 3, but when they take the train to the bad place, then the color shift takes a big thing. And also when we were back in even when we were back in hell, like in the offices, I basically stayed away from the red too. And, it was more of a blue, a cold,
Yeah.
cold color. So it was still very differentiated from what, you were seeing in the good place.
Every religion guessed about 5%, except for Doug Forsett. One night he got high on mushrooms and got like 92% correct.
I will say what was interesting about this is that I feel this is the only show that I've worked on that actually had a staff philosopher who was a philosophy professor at UCLA and would come into the writer's room weekly and kind of discuss life and death and the meaning of life and all these things. So, it was, I think Mike's a very, very smart man, a Harvard graduate. And, the show was a comedy, but actually the show really is a meditation on life, the meaning of life, how we fit into it, what relationships really mean, things like that. I mean, again, I think in another podcast I just talked about, the love story between Ted and Eleanor, I feel is one of the great chaste love stories, of all time. It's like, Arthur, it could be Arthurian, it could be, from something from the 13th century. So, it's just a very, very well thought out show. And, and the other part of it is he had a plan for the show. He had a finite amount. He knew where he wanted to go, how long it was going to take to get there, and how he wanted to end it.
Tell me one good thing that you did on Earth.
Do you have a second to talk about the environment?
Do you have a second to eat my farts?
Oh.
First of all, the characters are absolutely lovable, and two, it's funny, and three, everybody does wonder what's going to happen after all this. I mean, that's really the question, and if the good place is what existence is going to be afterwards, then that would be fantastic. I mean, we would all be so lucky. So I think it touched a lot of things. And I think it touched on, relationships and how people relate to each other and, and what it means to be human.